Welcome to the On List. Today I have a special episode for you. Well, I guess they're all technically special, depending on how you feel about my channel in general. But this is an extra special episode. And it's special because today I am going to put the final nail in the coffin about all the rumors circulating the whole Ho Hong and Ho Hong Club and their doppelgangers, Club de Balenciaga and Balenciaga Club, respectively. There is a lot of discourse amongst vintage enthusiasts whether they are the same fragrances or not, or they are some alternate formulas or flankers, or just what's the deal with them. Why are there bottles that look like Ho Hong but have Club on the packaging, and why are there bottles of Ho Hong Club with Club de Balenciaga? Like, what's going on here? And which one should you get? Is one better than the other? Blah, 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 blah. And I have had people argue with me until they're blue in the face about how Balenciaga Club is a different fragrance that's strikingly nearly identical, but still somehow different. And they go down the rabbit holes and try and prove me wrong with the different openings or the different way they develop in the dry down. And they get really pedantic, they get really in the weeds over it, and they huff and they puff and they try to blow my house down, but they don't, because like most people who sip the vintage Kool-Aid a little too hard, they get wrapped up in the YouTubers who like to add a spiritual fervor to all this cult-like mentality, a weird magical way of thinking, a superstitious way of thinking. They forget that there's a lot of science behind this. And if you're an anti-intellectual person in general, you're more of a populist kind of guy, you're someone who likes to follow what they call the groupthink, then I'm probably not a channel for you anyway. I'm not someone you want to subscribe to, because I'm very much against that. But people of that particular mentality, the sheeple, if you want to call it, the ones who congratulate themselves for a lack of critical thinking, right? They're going to be the ones that end up the most ripped off at the end of all this, paying a whole lot of money for something that's not better or worse than something else. So you can take my information and my perspective with a grain of salt, but you should still take it, is what I'm trying to tell you. Now, before I talk about that, let's just talk about Balenciaga, Ho Hong, and Ho Hong Club themselves. Like, let's talk about the fragrances in question before I talk about their alternate versions, right? Before we go down that rabbit hole. So, I'll reach back here into my collection and grab my bottles of Ho Hong and Ho Hong Club for you, and then we shall talk about them. And then I'll talk about their alternate variations. So, first things first, the original Ho Hong came out in 1971, and that's this guy right here. Now, Ho Hong, when it was originally released in 71, was meant to be a shared fragrance. And there are a lot of guys, again, the same ones who have the usual magical thinking. They also have really strange issues involving gender and perception of gender in fragrances, and they really dig a hard line in the sand about what smells masculine and what smells feminine, when they fail to realize that perfume is artifice anyway. So what determines if sandalwood is manly and rose is feminine is really about the culture, about the people consuming the perfume. What are their cultural values? What is the historical and social significance of those smells to those people? Because clearly you have a lot of guys in the Middle East who love to smell like rose and amber and heavy jasmine, and those are all things that tend to be associated with femininity over here in the West. Likewise, over in India, they love jasmine, they love ylang ylang, all kinds of floral things that again would really come across feminine in a Western market, and then vice versa over here in the US and also in many parts of Europe. Lavender is strictly masculine. Any kind of dry wood notes are strictly masculine, so on and so forth. But it's different cultures, and once upon a time, as much as it may pain you to accept this, it might pain you to accept this, but once upon a time, the smell of this fragrance was considered neutral, gender wise, neither masculine nor feminine. And you can understand that if you understand the history of the accords that are in this perfume. So, first of all, the original Ho Hong was composed by two guys, Jacques Jensen and Raymond Chylon. And Raymond Chylon was a very accomplished perfumer. He did a lot of things. He did the eponymous men's fragrance for Yves Saint Laurent, which was actually composed in like '67, but worn privately by Saint Laurent until '71 or '72 when it was released to the public. Then he composed this. Later on in life, he did things like Boucheron Pour Homme, which is another amazing fragrance. This is all masculine stuff, by the way. But this came out in '71, and he was kind of riding shotgun with Jacques Jensen. And the two of them, they looked back really 30, 40 years into the past. They looked back to the 30s and the 40s. And they saw that the Fougère Accord back then was not so strictly gendered as it is now. I mean, yeah, you had Skin Bracer, Aftershave, and stuff like that. And Caron Pour Homme was adjacent to a Fougère because of the heavy lavender and the heavy tonka. But a lot of your full-on fougères that had geranium and everything else in them, the really, dyed-in-the-wool fougères were actually fairly gender neutral. I mean, Jicky, Fougère Royale, right, among the first ones. Even into like the 1930s and 40s, you still had some unisex ones coming out, like this thing over here. This little guy. Hold on a second. Yeah. Created in 1941, I believe this came out. Maybe 42. Could be 43. I'm going to stick with 41, though. Arôme Toi by Parfums d'Orsay. Arôme Toi. And it had dual sex marketing. The old magazine and newsprint ads for this showed women swinging from swing sets, showed guys, dressed up and ready for the night. Showed all kinds of different walks of life, different people. And they were all expected to wear that fragrance, right? And it's a very green, pasty, has some orris in it. People compare it to a Band-Aid. I can understand that a little bit, but it's a very proper old school fougère. And the brain trust at Balenciaga, who picked up Jensen and Chylon, they wanted something like that. Right? They wanted something that was a little more traditional and shared. And thus, you got a very chewy, herbal, a little bit spicy, dry as a bone, though. Bone fucking dry. Dry as a bone, but spicy, chewy, herbal, very mossy. So you guys who are like obsessed, like drug addicts, you're obsessed with oak moss. Yeah, this is one for you. You'll sniff this and then your eyes will roll back in your head. You'll look like Linda Blair from The Exorcist. Your head will spin around because all the oak moss will go right to your cerebellum. Your medulla oak moss oblongata up there will swell and pop out of your ears. You'll look like Beetlejuice. Basically, your head will spin like at 9,000 RPM. Your brain will confuse itself for like a Honda S2000 motor or something. And you'll hit that VTEC and start going into the future, right? Warp speed ahead, Scotty. Make it so, number one. Whatever. My point is, very mossy and also powdery. So it's got a little bit of everything. It's got the florals, and the ladies like the florals. It's got the lavender and the woods, and the guys like those. Powders, kind of neither nor. Both sexes, on that binary system. In those days, we weren't unfortunately taking other people into account back then. But the sexes on that binary, had a little something for everyone. That was the idea with this fragrance. And the early ads, really showcased that. The early ads had guys and girls together, pulling each other's shirts off, kissing each other, doing all kinds of stuff. So now, history would have it that men liked this a whole lot more than women did. And you see, that right there was the problem with a lot of those early shared fragrances until CK1 came along, right? Which CK1 is like the first unisex fragrance done correctly. And I've done videos about that. I've talked about how CK1 didn't try to be a little something for everyone. It tried to be neither nor. It was completely androgynous, which is how you really want to go about a proper unisex fragrance, is not to have any suggestion of, tatas or wangle dangles. You want no suggestion of anything that could be perceived as gender related. So you create a void, a blank void. And that's what CK1 was. It was just laundry musks and hedione and tea notes and big, cloudy, puffy muskiness. And just, like I said, it was just an androgynous blob of good smelling stuff. And everyone loved it, and it became a thing. But when this came out, they were trying to do the little bit of this and a little bit of that. That's how they went about it. And you see that in a lot of the shared fragrances back then. You see it in Eau de Lancôme, Eau de Petou, Eau de Rochas, or Eau de Roche, if you talk about the old Runitska one. You saw that in YSL. They had their own take on this called Eau Libre in 73 or 74. I'm a little fuzzy on the year there. I think it was 74. But Eau Libre, same thing. It was a shared fragrance. Eau de Campagna by Sisley was another one like that. And just a lot of those fragrances. Eau de Guerlain in 74. Eau de Guerlain. A lot of those fragrances tried that. They tried to be, okay, a little bit of something that the ladies like, a little bit of something that the guys like. And every single one of those ended up on one side of the aisle or the other. In this case, guys claimed Ho Hong, ladies claimed Eau de Lancôme, ladies claimed Eau de Rochas. I think ladies claimed Eau de Petou as well. Guys claimed Eau Libre until it was discontinued. Didn't stay in production very long. But all of those kind of went to one team or the other, really, at the end of it all. So, and that's how it was. So that kind of told the market that people aren't ready for unisex fragrances, because, like I said, they ended up not staying unisex. And honestly, I don't care. I wear what I want anyway. And people who want to make a big, weird, socio-political rant about it and say that I'm woke or something, or I'm some kind of weird snowflake person or whatever, it's like, I don't care. I will hose myself down with Chanel number 19 and not in any way feel like my masculinity is diminished because of it. I will go outside in Cabochard. I will go outside in Avon Topaz. I don't care. I don't need a perfume to communicate, how big my crown jewels are down below the waist belt. I don't need that. I can do that on my own. So, hence me wearing this pink shirt, right? I don't care. So I feel like you can carry yourself. You don't need accoutrement to carry you. If you have to rely on the smell of your perfume anyway to communicate your persuasion, you're doing something wrong. Got to walk with that confidence, right? So, in any case, men ended up claiming this, and I can see why. Because into the mid 70s, Fougères got a new lease on life. They had already gotten like a new renewal in the 60s with Brut, which brought like the aromatic fougere back into the conversation. Chypres had dominated 30s, 40s, and 50s. The Chypres had taken over. People were tired of fougères. But in 64 with Brut, and then 65 with British Sterling, and then it just keeps on rolling after that. 73, Paco Rabanne Porhomme would come around and start a whole other round of fougères, which would lead into stuff that I talked about in my last video. So this was kind of at the right place at the right time for men to really take to it, because it had a smell that was very adjacent to those other things, right? To the Paco Rabannes and the other fougères, Brut and Equipage by Hermes. Hermes had Equipage come out, which was a Guy Robert fragrance. So same thing, right? Spicy, chewy, herbal, mossy fougères, heavier fougères than the Bruts and the Wild Countries and the Canois and all that stuff. So those were all more sweeter, more barbershoppy, more powdery. These are much heavier, more just more foresty, I guess. You know, like Aqua de Selva was a very foresty fragrance too back in '47. So we were kind of going back to that. We were returning to the heavier, more foresty style. Now, the original Ho Hang was released at a time when Marbert took over Balenciaga, because Cristobal had died in like 67 or something. So Balenciaga was kind of a ghost house. The actual couture side was shuttered. There were no fashions anymore. So at that point, Balenciaga was just accessories and cosmetics, and that's it. Perfumes, sunglasses, bangles to hang on your arm. That's all they were doing. And Marbert took that over. So the original bottles with the honeycomb pattern on the boxes and the cap was clear, those were a product of Marbert, just in case you're wondering. This bottle here, this came out when the Bogart Group, aka Jacques Bogart, who also owned Ted Lapidus at the time, they decided to take the license over because Marbert was struggling financially. So Marbert passed the torch, and the Bogart Group got Balenciaga, and they had them all the way up until 96 or 97. So they put out several perfumes, and Rumba for women, I think Creation, although that might have been a Lapidus fragrance, I think, I'm not sure. But I know Rumba was originally a Balenciaga. Ho Hang Club, Portos was the last Marbert fragrance, by the way. Marbert came out with Portos in 1980. And then after that, the license flipped over to the Bogart Group, and they had Ho Hang Club, Rumba, Cristobal, handful of others, and then that was it. Then they sold off Balenciaga, and then Coty picked it up, and then Coty basically threw everything away. Coty just swiped the entire slate clean and started over again with Flora Botanica and stuff like that. So this didn't survive into the 2000s. This died in the 20th century, basically. This fragrance died with the 1900s. So now its follow-up, which is a Lapidus adjacent type of fragrance, because a lot of the Bogart Group fragrances were all kind of very similar to Bogart fragrances themselves. Heavy, loud, statement-making fragrances. That's kind of all Bogart knew how to do. So all of their licensed brands like Lapidus, Chevignon, Balenciaga at the time, they all just made big, huge powerhouse fragrances. So it's funny, it didn't really matter what the name on the bottle was, whether it was Chevignon or Balenciaga or Lapidus. It was all just Bogart anyway. This came out in 87, and I don't know why they decided to make a flanker to Ho Hang and then make it nothing at all like the original. But the Ho Hang Club as it was called, Ho Hong Club. Big, heavy, musky, carnation, patchouli fragrance. So for those of you who are well versed in your vintages, you know your vintages. Imagine someone taking something like Crizia Moods Uomo, which wasn't out yet in '87, or maybe let's do Boss. Take something like Boss, the original Boss or Boss number one, mix it with French line. So the carnation, almost cherry type of a smell that French line has, which is 84. Take the French line and cross it with the Boss, and you kind of get this. So it's got the big carnation, fruity, very fruity lactonic kind of opening. And then it goes into the patchouli, and then there's the civet, which is probably not real civet. It's probably cinnamon. So you get cinnamon animalis in the base. You get leather. It's got a leather base. It's got spices in it. It's just a real big, big fragrance, but way bigger than Ho Hong, the original Ho Hong, which is a very dapper, very, despite the really sexed up ads for Ho Hong back in the day, it was a very dapper, very genteel fragrance. Again, lending to why men probably liked it more. This, on the other hand, was the big shoulder pads and the crazy hair, the zebra stripes. You're listening to Bon Jovi. Okay, you're driving your Ferrari Testarossa with your big aviator shades on. So you're in that whole 80s zeitgeist with this fragrance. Although you would never know it by the very sort of monolithic black repackaging of the original Ho Hong bottle, clearly, but all clad in black. Now we can talk about the lookalikes, the people that go, oh, they're different fragrances. Let's get down to that mystery. Let's get it solved. Scooby-Doo and the gang is on the case. So here you go. Here are my two in the box, Ho Hong and Club. You can clearly see that they have the identical packaging, the identical graphics. Okay, you turn them over on the back, and you get slightly different words at the bottom here because one is a little bit older than the other. One was distributed by French Fragrances, and one was distributed directly by Balenciaga because they got a distribution deal through French Fragrances to sell in the U.S. because they didn't have the Bogart Group. The Bogart Group didn't have its own distribution in the U.S. They used French Fragrances. A lot of brands used French Fragrances. Halston used French Fragrances, and then eventually, Elizabeth Arden bought them out. So Elizabeth Arden bought French Fragrances and just turned them into an arm of EA, which is a whole different story for a different video. We'll talk about that later. But they were originally just a distributor. Now, the thing that's really going to give away that these are the same, for those of you who don't believe me, who will argue until you're blue in the face, look at my Balenciaga Club box. And look on the back. You know what it says? It says Parfums Ho Hong. Does it not? Look at that. Parfum Ho Hong. It has alcohol, water, Parfum Ho Hong, right? And colorants. It's a 3-ingredient list bottle because the old ones were, right? And it's alcohol, Parfum Ho Hong, once more for the people in the back. Alcohol, Parfum Ho Hong, and colorants. So they are literally telling you, they're telling you on the box that this is Ho Hong. They're just calling it Club. Why are they calling it Club? That's your next question. Well, now that we've solved the mystery, we know they are the same damn fucking fragrance. Why does it have a different name, right? I can answer that for you very easily. So take a little trip down the Babelfish lane, Google Translate, whatever you want to do. Look up the word Ho Hong. You quickly realize how many different meanings it has. So There are some African dialects where ho hang can mean everything from step back to shady and not trustworthy. Certain Asian dialects, ho hang can mean everything from yummy, delicious, like Cantonese, it's yummy, to good luck. And then in Vietnamese, it actually has a bit of a sexual innuendo. So ho hang in Vietnamese is like low necked. So like that's like saying you got a low neckline, right? You're ho hang, so your stuff's hanging out, and that can mean sexy. So to prevent a social faux pas in any of those countries where this was being sold, they just said, you know what? We're going to spare ourselves that grief, and we're just going to call it Club. So, lo and behold, if you pick up an old bottle that once circulated in the Middle East or Africa or Asia or anywhere that was basically east of Western Europe, so I guess Eastern Europe qualifies too, anywhere thereabouts in those parts of the world, the Mediterranean, maybe Japan too, who knows how far these bottles traveled, but you bought a bottle outside of Paris, you bought a bottle outside of the UK or somewhere in the US, it's probably going to be called this because they didn't want to risk this meaning something that could possibly offend someone. You want to make jokes about woke, right? You want to make jokes about hand wringing and snowflakes. Well, way back in the day, they were concerned about that. Way back in the 80s, they were concerned about that, right? So it's not a new thing. This isn't like a millennial phenomenon or a Gen Z phenomenon. You had actual boomers and Gen X people concerned about hurting feelings back in the 80s. So much that they would change the name of a bottle or a perfume to avoid offending someone. So that's why that exists. Is it a valid reason? I will leave that up to you. I will not argue for or against, but that is the reason. And you see the literal exact phenomenon appear again with the flanker. Except this time, since the flanker is called Ho Hang Club, they got to call it something different. They can't call it Club. That would be stupid. Right? Balenciaga, Ho Hang, and Balenciaga Club. They can't call it Club, Ho Hang Club and Club. That would just that would be ridiculous. So they did one better. They called it Le Club. Le Club. See, there it is. The camera's not going to focus all that well, I don't think, but you can kind of see it there, right? You can sort of see it. Here's the Ho Hang Club. Yeah, here's a Ho Hang Club as my camera fails to focus, but you can still kind of get it. And then here's the Le Club de Balenciaga. So there it is. There. That's focused now. Now you can see it. Le Club de Balenciaga and Ho Hang Club. These are the 50 ml bottles, by the way. If you ever want to know what the small ones look like. This is the big 100 ml jobber. This is a little 50 ml doodad. So I like these 50 mils because these fit in a pocket. They fit in a book bag real nice. So if you need to have a little bit of vintage powerhouse on the go, take to work with you. You want to refresh your big musky carnation patchouli, and you don't want to drag the big bottle, you can just shove this in a book bag. It's real nice. These also tend to be a lot less expensive than those big bottles. I mean, they're not cheap now. They were like 20, 30 bucks like 5 years. Like pre-pandemic, these things were giveaways. Everyone was telling you to run out and get these because they were so cheap. Now you're still going to pay like 60, 70 bucks. But paying 60, 70 bucks for one of these is a hell of a lot better than paying like $300 fucking dollars for this, which I wouldn't do. You're pushing into luxury prices at that point. It's just not worth it. I mean, the original Ho Hang is something special, and if you have the money to flex and you want to drop $300 on a bottle of original Ho Hang, I can't blame you. I can't blame you there. But for this one, no, because you can wear Boss, you can wear Crizia Moods Uomo, you can wear just about anything that's like this, anything from that era that has this kind of vibe to it, you can do it. Original Perialis will work. Giorgio for men will work. Like all of those big patchouli fragrances, some with carnation, some without. But yeah, you don't need to pay big bucks for this. If you can get your hands on it and it's reasonable, do it. But otherwise, don't. Don't stress it. And there you have it. There is the eternal mystery solved of Balenciaga Ho Hong and Ho Hong Club. I love both fragrances dearly, and obviously I bought them before they went super nuclear nova expensive. So I mean, you can be a little jealous of me if you want to, but if I'd do it over again, I wouldn't. Clearly, I wouldn't pay those prices for it now. But I can say that having owned them, right? I have the luxury of saying that, so I guess for what it's worth. I don't want to rub it in anyone's face, though. Okay, I'm not that guy to do that. So, if you have any questions or concerns, let me know in the comment section, and hopefully I answered all your questions. And